out as an empire, built on the velocity of the horse and the terror of the bow, hold territory it cannot possibly police. It doesn't. It forces the conquered to police themselves and their neighbors. This is the central, brutal genius of the Mongol military machine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together of the Mongol Empire. The 13th century Mongol Empire was a paradox. It was an explosion of motion, a cavalry wave that had shattered civilizations from the Yellow River to the plains of Hungary. But a wave must eventually recede, or at least slow down. By the 1240s, the conquests under Genghis Khan's successors, Ogadai and Guyuk, had created an entity so vast it defied conventional governance. The steppe heartland, centered around Karakorum, was thousands of miles from the volatile frontiers of Persia, Anatolia, and the fractured Rus's principalities. The core Mongol army, the Kipchaks and the elite Cumans, were masters of the offensive war. They were the hammer. But an empire cannot be held by a hammer alone. It requires an anvil. It requires static defense, garrison troops, and logistical networks. This was work the nomadic elite disdained, and more importantly, they simply lacked the numbers to police an entire continent. This fundamental crisis of imperial overstretch demanded a solution that was as ruthless as it was systematic. That solution was the Tama. The word itself is often translated simply as garrison or frontier post. But this sterile definition fails to capture the human reality. The Tama was not a building, it was a system. It was the institutionalized, forced deportation and reorganization of entire conquered populations, specifically their military-aged men, to serve as the empire's permanent frontier shield. When we consult the primary sources, such as the secret history of the Mongols and the detailed chronicles of Persian administrators like Rashid al-Din, we see the Tama emerge not as a haphazard reaction, but as a deliberate, calculated policy. It began at the moment of surrender. Imagine a Khwarezmian, Cuman, or Alan army shattered in the field. Their chain of command is broken. Their Shah or Khan is dead or in flight. A Mongol Noyan, a general, surveys the thousands of survivors. These are not just refugees. They are a resource. They are trained soldiers, hardened men who know the local terrain, the climate, and the languages. To the Mongol mind, wasting this resource was unthinkable. These men were not, in most cases, marched back to Mongolia in chains or sold in the slave markets of Bukhara. That was a fate reserved for many artisans and civilians. Instead, these military units were often kept largely intact, but their native leadership was decapitated. Mongol officers, a darugachi or a tamachi, were placed in command. Their families were rounded up, effectively becoming hostages, and then the entire group was given a new, permanent, and non-negotiable assignment. This assignment was the frontier. The new Tamma units were forcibly resettled, often marching hundreds or even thousands of miles. They were moved to the most dangerous, unstable borders of the new empire. Khwarezmian troops were settled in the Caucasus to fight the Georgians. Alan and Cuman warriors were relocated to the borders of Song China. Later, Defeated Rus's and Kipchak forces would be integrated into the military structures of the Golden Horde, tasked with policing the very lands they once called home. This policy served two immediate, brilliant, and terrifying functions. First, it acted as a human buffer zone. The Tamma were the empire's ablative armor. They absorbed the first shock of any rebellion or external invasion. If a Lithuanian raid struck the Rus's frontier, or a Mamluk patrol crossed the Euphrates, it was the Tamma who fought and died, not the elite Mongol cavalry. This system allowed the core Mongol army to be kept in reserve, fresh, and ready to act as a mobile strike force, the fire brigade that could crush any real threat to imperial integrity. Second, it was a tool of demographic engineering. It physically broke the power of the old, conquered elite by removing their armies and scattering them across the empire. A Cuman warlord was powerless if his warriors were now serving a Mongol Nyan 5,000 miles away on the border of Persia. It was a strategy of political castration on a mass scale. When we analyze the legal status of a Tama soldier, we enter a complex gray area of Mongol law, governed by the Yasa. They were not free men. They could not leave their assigned posts. Their status was hereditary. Their children were born into the Tama, creating a permanent military caste bound to the land they garrisoned. This was not a temporary deployment. It was a life sentence for an entire people. Yet they were not simple chattel slaves, bo all. They were permitted to bear arms. They retained their military structures, albeit under Mongol oversight. In this, the Tama system bears a chilling resemblance to other, later systems of military servitude, such as the Ottoman Janissaries or the Mamluks of Egypt, both of whom were enslaved, trained as soldiers, and rose to positions of immense power. The Tamma, however, rarely rose. Their purpose was to endure and to die. This reality directly confronts a persistent myth that the Mongols were merely chaotic destroyers. The Tamma system proves the opposite. It shows a highly sophisticated, cold, and calculating administrative mind at work. This was the machinery of empire, built not from stone and mortar, but from the sinew and loyalty of conquered armies, chained to the frontier by law, necessity, and the tactical placement of their own families. These chains of law and necessity forged a unique social and legal class, one that existed in the perilous gray space between a subject and a slave. When we deconstruct the legal framework of the Mongol Empire, we find the Tama occupied a status defined almost entirely by obligation. They were not chattel slaves, the bo-ol, who were personal property to be bought and sold. The Tama were, in a sense, state property. They were a strategic asset, like a fortress or a herd of horses, belonging to the Khan and the imperial lineage. Their legal obligation was a specialized form of alba, the universal Mongol term for tax or corvée labor. But unlike a conquered farmer who paid his alba in grain, or an artisan who paid with his craft, the Tama paid in one currency only: perpetual, hereditary military service. This was not a draft. It was a permanent redefinition of their entire people. When we consult the administrative records, particularly the detailed tax census reports commissioned by Khans like Munka, we see that Tama populations were counted not as individuals, but as ujin, or households. Each household was obligated to provide a set number of soldiers forever. A Tama soldier's son was born into this obligation. His daughter was expected to marry within the Tama community to produce more soldiers. There was no legal mechanism for promotion out of this status, no path to freedom, no retirement after 20 years of service. The Yasa, the Mongol legal code, was clear. To abandon one's post was desertion, an act of treason punishable by the execution of the soldier, and often the enslavement or punishment of his family. This legal classification was not an abstract title, it was a life sentence. So, what was the daily reality of this perpetual garrison duty? We must set aside any romantic notions of the noble warrior on the frontier. Life for a Tamma unit was a grueling, monotonous, and terrifying existence, combining the hard labor of a peasant with the constant peril of a frontline soldier. Imagine a Tama settlement in the 1260s, perched precariously on the Byzantine Ilkhanate border in Anatolia. It is not a grand stone castle, but more likely a fortified earthen-walled village, a krajan surrounded by fields. The soldiers themselves are a mix, perhaps Khwarezmians relocated from Central Asia, or even captured Georgian auxiliaries, all serving a Mongol Tamachi, or commander. Their primary duty was to be the frontier. This meant constant, low-intensity warfare. Their days were a rhythm of patrols, scouting parties sent deep into enemy territory to gather intelligence, and escort duty for the Yam postal riders or for tax collectors. They were the empire's eyes and ears. When a hostile force was spotted, a Byzantine raiding party or a rival nomadic tribe, the Tama were the first line of defense. They were expected to engage and hold the enemy, buying time for the elite, heavy Mongol Keshik troops stationed further back to mobilize and deliver the decisive blow. They were, by design, expendable, but their service did not end with combat. This is a crucial point that is often misunderstood. The Mongol administration was brutally efficient. It did not believe in useless mouths. The Tama were a self-sustaining economic engine. The empire granted them land, often the very land they had just conquered, and they were expected to farm it. Between patrols, these soldiers would be planting barley, tending to livestock, and repairing their own fortifications. Their families, wives, children, and elders were the agricultural workforce that fed the garrison. This system served a dual economic function. First, it made the frontier garrisons cost-neutral. The Mongol state did not have to expend its central resources on a massive standing salaried army. The Tamma fed themselves and equipped themselves, often using their own native styles of weaponry. The Cuman bow, the Allan lance, supplemented with Mongol-style armor from state workshops. Second, it bound them irrevocably to the land. A soldier who must also farm is a soldier who cannot easily flee. His fields, his meager stores of grain, and his family tie him to that specific patch of earth. This was the genius of the system. The garrison became a prison, and the prisoners were their own wardens. Their relationship with their Mongol masters was one of absolute, non-negotiable subordination. The Tamachi commander held the power of life and death. He administered the Yasa, collecting taxes from any surplus the Tama produced and dispensing justice. The justice was swift and designed to maintain discipline. The records of travelers like William of Rubruck, who passed through these territories, describe an atmosphere of pervasive fear. And at the heart of this control system was the family. The presence of wives and children was not a comfort. It was the ultimate chain. A Tamma soldier, no matter how much he resented his Mongol overlord, could not desert. To do so would be to abandon his family to certain and brutal retribution. This tactical use of the family as collateral is a recurring theme in Mongol imperial policy. This institutionalized existence created a profound psychological rift. These soldiers were men without a people. To ensure their loyalty, or rather, to prevent their disloyalty, Tamma units were almost always posted far from their original homelands. An Alan warrior from the Caucasus might find himself garrisoning the borders of Korea. A Kipchak from the steppe might be stationed in Persia. This policy of ethnic isolation was deliberate. A Tamma soldier in a foreign land had no local allies. He did not speak the language of the peasants he was policing. He was as alien to the local population as the Mongols themselves. This isolation forged a grudging dependency on the very imperial structure that oppressed him. His only community was his fellow Tamma, and his only path to survival was obedience to the Mongol Noyan. When we compare the Tamma to other military institutions, its unique character becomes clear. They were not federati, like the Germanic tribes allied with Rome, who fought for pay and privilege. The Tamma had no privilege. They were not feudal levies, serving a lord for 40 days a year. The Tamma's service was 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, for all generations. While the system bears some resemblance to the later Ottoman Janissaries or the Egyptian Mamluks, it differs in one fundamental respect. The Janissaries and Mamluks were slave elites, conscripted as boys, trained, and often rose to become the masters of their empires. The Tamma were not an elite. They were a mass, an entire conquered military class, demoted and permanently locked into the role of a frontier buffer. They were not trained to rule. They were deployed to die. This was the machinery of servitude, a human wall built to absorb the shocks of a violent world, ensuring the peace of the Pax Mongolica within. The vast machinery of servitude, this system of human buffer zones, was predicated on one singular assumption: the permanence of a unified Mongol Empire. It was a solution designed by a central, unchallengeable authority. But this assumption was a fatal miscalculation. The Tamma, designed to be the empire's unthinking shield, was a weapon that would outlive its master. When the central authority of the Great Khan in Karakorum fractured, splintering into the rival Khanates of the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan Dynasty, this weapon, chained to the frontiers, began to develop a political will of its own. The long shadow of the Tamma is not just a story of oppression. It is a story of profound and violent political and demographic transformation. The very soldiers intended to guard the empires became the men who would one day rule them or tear them apart. We must trace this legacy in the successor states. In the Ilkhanate of Persia, the Tamma units, comprised of Georgians, Armenians, Alans from the Caucasus, and Khwarezmian Turks, formed the backbone of the military. The Mongol elite, a tiny minority ruling over a vast and sophisticated Persian Islamic civilization, relied on these foreign garrisons for their own security. When we consult the chronicles of Rashid al-Din, we see these Tamma commanders, or Noyans, evolving from simple garrison captains into powerful political brokers. They were not loyal to the abstract idea of Persia. They were loyal to their commander and their unit. As the Ilkhanate dynasty weakened in the 1330s, consumed by internal feuds, it was these Tama warlords who stepped into the vacuum. The empire didn't collapse into anarchy. It fractured along the pre-existing military fault lines of the Tama garrisons. Warlords of Alan or Georgian descent seized control of entire provinces, founding short-lived dynasties. The empire's immune system had, in effect, consumed the body. The demographic legacy here is one of deliberate ethnic reorganization. The forced migration of thousands of Christian Alans from the Caucasus to the heart of Persia and Anatolia left a permanent mark. These communities, serving as soldiers, maintained their identities for generations, becoming a distinct military caste. But perhaps the most profound legacy is found on the frontier of Anatolia. The Mongols had shattered the Seljuk Sultanate and pushed countless Turkmen tribes to the very edge of the Byzantine Empire. These frontier warriors, organized under the Tama system, were a volatile mix of displaced nomads, conquered soldiers, and Ghazis, warriors for the Islamic faith. They lived in a state of perpetual, low-intensity war. When the Ilkhanate's power faded, this frontier exploded. Out of this militarized melting pot, one Beylik, or principality, led by a minor Ghazi warrior named Osman, proved the most adept. The Ottoman Empire was born from the very frontier chaos and military society that the Tama system had created and institutionalized. In a supreme historical irony, the Mongol system, designed to protect its Anatolian frontier by garrisoning it with Turkic warriors, inadvertently created the perfect military incubator for the power that would, centuries later, conquer the last remnant of the Roman Empire. In the lands of the Golden Horde, the legacy was one of absorption. The Mongols, under Batu Khan, had conquered the vast Kipchak-Cuman confederation. They incorporated its defeated armies wholesale into their military structure, a massive Tama. But here, the numbers were overwhelming. The Mongol elite was a small island in a vast Turkic sea. Over the next century, a remarkable demographic reversal occurred. The Mongol conquerors were culturally and linguistically consumed by their Tama subjects. They adopted the Kipchak language, converted to Islam, and intermarried. When we look at the ethnogenesis of the modern peoples of the steppe, the Tatars, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks, we are looking at the direct descendants of this fusion. The Tama didn't just serve the Golden Horde, they became the Golden Horde. The legal framework of servitude slowly dissolved into a new, hybrid Turco-Mongol identity. And what of the Yuan Dynasty in China? Here, the Tama system reveals its starkest purpose: an internal occupation force. Kublai Khan and his successors distrusted their new Chinese subjects. To police the vast empire, they imported Tama units from the opposite end of their world. When Marco Polo visited, he expressed surprise at finding Christian Allan soldiers serving as the Khan's elite guard in Beijing. We find records of Kipchak Tama garrisons stationed deep in southern China, and even a Tama of Rus's warriors captured on the Eastern European frontier and resettled thousands of miles away. These units were the ultimate aliens. They had no connection to the local population, spoke a different language, and practiced a different religion. They were the perfect, ruthless tool of imperial control. Their political legacy was short-lived. When the Yuan Dynasty was overthrown by the native Chinese Ming, In 1368, these foreign garrisons were hunted down, slaughtered, or scattered. They left little demographic trace, a historical dead end, but a terrifying testament to the system's global reach. The Tamma system, therefore, corrects a fundamental misunderstanding of the Mongol Empire. It was not just a wave of destruction. It was a sophisticated, systematic, and brutal engine of imperial construction. It was one of the largest and most calculated programs of forced migration in pre-modern history. The Tamma rerouted the ethnic, political, and military map of Eurasia. The frontiers the Mongols established and the peoples they forcibly moved to defend them became the fault lines of the modern world. The Tama are a quiet testament to a brutal historical truth. Empires are not just built on victory, but on the systematic organization of the defeated. The resilience of these garrison communities, who preserve their identity across centuries of servitude, is a story written not in the grand chronicles of Khans, but in the stubborn survival of language, custom, and memory on the frontiers of a forgotten world.